So first, I kind of wanted you to elaborate on your research projects. I know in our previous interview you had talked about specifically ones about like newspaper headlines and like mental health, and I think that um, is pretty similar to like the topic that we kind of want to talk about. So I kind of wanted you to elaborate on that project and kind of how you came up with that idea and how you became passionate about it.
Okay. Yeah. So I am interested in mental health representation in media in general. And so it started with seeing how mental illness was described in news reports after like shootings and kind of things that are deemed as dangerous behavior, even though research shows that a very small percentage of individuals um, who commit these crimes have a mental illness, and yet that's kind of what you see in newspapers and headlines. So that kind of is what started the research component of it. I also have a brother who has schizophrenia, and mental illness runs in my family. I've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And so obviously there's a personal connection to understanding how mental illness is represented. I also tend to, I mean, I'm in entertainment. I love TV and all of that stuff. And so kind of recognizing the depictions that I watch as a viewer has also been something that has spurred my interest in really looking at it from a researcher perspective, as opposed to just a casual observer. So um, I a lot of the research that I do is kind of like I will see something, I'll see a TV show, I'll read a newspaper article, whatever the case is, and that kind of starts my interest in making it like a study. So that's how the newspaper one started, and then I'm currently working with a student on um, uh, depictions of mental illness in procedural dramas, like hour-long TV shows, um, and because you tend to see kind of the same stereotypical representation of someone who's dangerous, who's causing harm, who needs to be arrested, or whatever the case is. So, yeah, somewhat long-winded, but I hope that that answer your
Yes,
question.
it definitely did.
Okay.
Um, and then my other question is, how did you kind of go about your research, I guess? And or like, is there a specific type of research, whether like qualitative, quantitative surveys, focus groups, whatever, that you think kind of helps researchers like get the most amount of information?
Obviously they all have their benefits. I prefer qualitative research. It's just more in my wheelhouse and I'm more comfortable with it. I took a couple quantitative classes at various points in my grad program, and I mean, I got through them, but they're not, but they're just not something that I love to do. So I mean, part of the reason that qualitative research lends itself well to what I do is because I'm looking at the language that's being used. So, like in that representation, it's like what are people saying, what's the tone and kind of the words that are being strung together to describe individuals. So obviously qualitative research lends itself well to that. I so within qualitative research I do typically content analysis, which most people associate with quantitative research,
Mhm.
but I use it more from like a linguistic standpoint, and more of like coding for the frequency of words. And so there's something called critical discourse analysis, and that's what most of my research is. And it's just looking at how things are phrased, if certain words are being repeated constantly, because all of those signify different things. So, and then also within discourse analysis, there's a researcher who looked at like power dynamics. And so depending on the language, the sources that are used in like a newspaper article, or who is saying these words, that can show a power dynamic that is important in understanding how these representations are created and perpetuated in media.
Mhm. Awesome. Yeah, I think is probably, I'm not entirely sure yet what we want to how we want to conduct our research for this project, but I think like any type of like survey and catching up, kind of get catching on um similar language and like the similar phrases that maybe students will use when they talk about their own mental health. I think that's going to be like a big part in kind of seeing like the trends of how they talk about it and how they talk about it with their education. So,
Yeah. So that's why, like in a survey, you could definitely use like an open ended, like a fill in the blank, not fill in the blank, but like a uh, um,
like a free
short
response.
answer. Yeah. Like where people can actually write what they want to
Yeah.
say as opposed to, I mean, you want your demo, when you do a survey, you want like your demographic information and you want questions with like a scale and all of that stuff. But adding in those questions where they can actually express more of their thoughts and opinions can be very beneficial. So,
Mhm. Awesome. Another question that we had, kind of just like like a question about protocol, I guess.
yeah.
Um, One of my teammates was asking that once you've gathered your survey data, do you recommend like following up? Do you recommend any it says do you conduct follow-up surveys or any like other research methods?
So I think it depends on your each study.
Mhm.
I think sometimes you can. One of the things that you can do, well, oftentimes a survey is anonymous. So I mean, it would be difficult to follow up with people.
Mhm.
What I have seen done is if people are willing to have an interview, like follow up interview, then you give that option where they can like put in their name and their phone number.
Mhm.
Um, and then, I mean, it can be very beneficial to, like, okay, say you have a survey of, I don't know, let's 100 people, and then you could do like one or two focus groups to kind of delve in deeper.
Mhm.
Obviously, you're not going to be able to pick and choose which individuals because they're going to have to be forthcoming in giving you their information to talk to again in the
Mhm.
focus group. But no, I mean, it can definitely be beneficial because you go from having just quantitative data in the survey to then adding in that additional qualitative information from like a focus group later
Mhm.
on, or in-depth interviews. Maybe you follow up with like 3 people, 3 to 5 people, and do in-depth interviews and ask them, because the thing is with research, your questions always evolve. Like you
Mhm.
start to get data and then you're like, wait, but I want more information on
Yeah.
this part or more information on this part. And so it's like you have to figure out how you can get those answers. Maybe you can't because it's just the way that that study was conducted, and you
Mhm.
have to do like a follow-up study, like a separate one completely, because that's an option too. But yeah, I mean, there's different ways that you can definitely go about following up with people.
Mhm. Good. That's good to know. I know that like within the situation that we're in right now, I know focus groups are hard because it's kind
Mhm.
of like where not only like where do you get these people because we can't just like walk around campus and be like, oh hey, like can you
Yeah.
do this for me? Like it's kind of like on social media you have to be like, oh this is for a class, like
Yeah. I
so.
had so I follow some of my students on social media.
Mhm.
Um and like they follow me back too. I don't want that to sound like weird that I've like so many students. Anyway, so I remember last semester several of them were taking this class and they like posted take my survey, it's in my bio and all that
Mhm.
stuff. And so like they were using their Instagram to kind of get their results.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a different way of doing it right now.
Mhm.